Hey everybody, I just wanted to come and make another devotion post this week. Sorry I missed last week. Things getting really hectic around here, and I just couldn't squeeze it in. But I'm back this week. Thank you so much for all you who are subscribing and viewing this post diligently. Um, Today I just want to talk about something very briefly. I'm gonna try to do this as fast as I can. Um, I want to talk about something that I think really affects all of us. And for conscientious believers, this may really be a question that's in our mind. We live in a world right now where it seems like one of the easiest things for us to do, and one of the things that we are the most assaulted with, is fear. We live in a world where you've got mindless mobs that are, looting, pillaging cities, taking over whole city blocks, whole sections of cities. The local governments are letting them do it and encouraging them to do it. Violent crime is rampant in these places. They're burning down buildings, they're tearing down statues, they're breaking into people's homes and hurting people, and nobody seems to be stopping them. In some situations, and we've also got the COVID-19 pandemic that seems to be, it's still out there, and if the numbers that we're seeing are true, it's kind of, escalating. It's getting more widespread. More people are suffering from it. We're kind of on the brink of, kids are about to go back to school, and we're on that brink of, some people are scared because if we go back to school, if we open everything up, the pandemic's going to spread even more, and people are going to get hurt, people are going to die. Other people are terrified that if we don't go back, if we retreat at this point, and then the economy is going to collapse, they're going to lose their businesses, they're going to lose their livelihoods. And then also you have just the individual things of life that are always there, that wayward child that you lay in bed at night and you worry about because you raised them the best you could and they just went off the deep end. Um, you know, People still get cancer. People still, are have financial trouble. People are, on the verge of retiring, or they've just retired and they don't know how they're going to make it financially, or in any other kind of way. And there's all these things in life that just cause us to be faced with fear all the time. We can easily be afraid. And we know that in the Bible, God tells us so many times, fear not. So for the conscientious believer, that leaves us with a question. I think a lot of people have this question. If I feel afraid, am I sinning? If I feel afraid, am I disappointing the Lord here? And I think God gives us some very practical teaching about this. I think that there's a very clear lens that we need to look through here on this, and we get some answers. So, just very quickly, I think, a good way to see this topic is from Deuteronomy 7:17 through 19. The children of Israel obviously had been delivered from Egypt. They got into the promised land. They gave into unbelief. They wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years. That generation died. Now the next generation of Israelites are about to enter into the promised land. Moses is exhorting them, and he's saying, listen, don't be like your fathers were. Don't give in to unbelief and fear. You're going to go in. This is what God's telling you to do. And God's telling them here in chapter 7 that they are a holy people unto Him, that they're going to go in and they're going to conquer the nations that are before them. And He says in verse 17, He says, if you say in your heart, talking about when they go in to dispossess the land, or dispossess the people from the land. If you say in your heart, these nations are greater than I, how can I dispossess them? You shall not be afraid of them, but you shall remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs and wonders, the mighty hand and the outstretched arm by which the Lord your God brought you out. So will the Lord your God do to all the peoples of whom you are afraid. So we see kind of a paradox here. He says in verse 18, you shall not be afraid of them. But then he says, and they haven't entered yet now. He's saying in the future, you shall not be afraid of them. But then he says in verse 19, talking about when they enter in, he says, so will the Lord your God do to all the peoples of whom you are afraid. Saying you shall not be afraid of them, but I know you're going to be afraid. So, you know, what does that mean? Where do we go with that? Well, first of all, you know, should the people, or did these people have a valid reason to be afraid? Is God saying that don't be afraid because you have no reason to be afraid? Your fear is unfounded? Well, absolutely not. God's not saying that the people that they're going to go in to dispossess are not in the natural more numerous than they are, more fortified than they are, mightier than they are. He's not saying these people are not a real valid threat that they, under normal, just simply naturalistic circumstances, they shouldn't be afraid of. In fact, he says in verse 7 of the same chapter, when he's talking about why he chose Israel, he says, "It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all peoples." So he's not saying that Israel is the greatest, mightiest group of people on the face of the planet. In fact, he's saying that kind of the opposite may very well be true in all these situations that they're about to walk into. So it's not that there's no natural reason that you can't, with the natural mind, process that they'd be afraid. Um, but he's saying, I know you're going to be afraid. Don't be afraid. I think one thing we have to understand is that I think where a lot of people get upset here is that when God says fear not, He's not necessarily primarily talking about the feelings of fear. Um, Emotions typically are not commanded in the Bible because emotions can't really be controlled. You can't make yourself just feel happy. You can't make yourself just feel sad. Um, there's a process that we go through, and our emotions can sometimes show the position of our heart, but we can't really trust our emotions. We all know our emotions are fickle and all those kind of things. So um, not that not that we shouldn't strive to feel the way that we that in a way that would be honoring to God in every situation. We should, but that's not really what I think God's getting to here. There are some situations in which a sense of fear, and I mean terror, is actually something that God very well may use. Like if I'm walking through the woods and all of a sudden a grizzly bear stands up and he looks like he's going to eat me, I guarantee you I'm going to feel a certain amount of terror. Now that God may use that to bless me. That may kick in my fight or flight response, and if I'm not an idiot, I'm not going to try to fight. I will try to climb a tree as quickly as I can, and that very well may save my life. Um, so what we're talking about here is not really the primarily the feeling of fear. What we're talking about when God says fear not is He's saying do not be overwhelmed by fear. Another way of saying that is what we see in 2 Timothy 1:7, where He says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." Now, some people in some circles would say that when He says we haven't been given a spirit of fear, that means like a demonic spirit of tries to terrorize you and that kind of stuff. That's not what God's saying at all. What He's saying is when He says spirit, what He really means there is a mindset, a overarching the overarching way that you typically think, the way you view the world, view yourself, view your situation. So when He says God has not given us a spirit of fear, what He really means is that that what He's saying is that's the way that the world has to think. They only have a spirit of fear. Because think about it. If you're just by yourself in this world, then a violent mob is something that you can only be terrified about, and you have to make your decisions based on that fear. Um, a pandemic is something that you have to be fearful of, and you can only make your decisions out of fear. Why? Because you are totally powerless and you're totally left on your own in this vast ocean of terrorizing possibilities and probabilities. But he says, you haven't been given that spirit of fear by God, but now by God, you've been given a spirit or a mindset of power and love and a self-control. What that means is that you and I, as born again children of God, we've been given a spirit of power because we're not on our own anymore. We now know that we have someone in our corner that is for us and that's reigning sovereignly over every single situation, every single second of our lives, everything that would come against us, and everything that would succeed or fail as it comes against us is completely under the power of God Almighty. So we don't have to operate with a mindset with the same mindset that we used to operate with. Now we operate with a brand new reality. We see everything through the lens of God is in control of this, and I need not fear because I'm not on my own. Okay, we have a spirit of love, because not only do we know God's in control, God loves us. God has adopted us as His sons and His daughters. See what kind of love the Father has given us, that we should be called the children of God. You are a child of God. If you're a born again believer, then you're a child of God, and God is acting presently in your life. Everything that comes against you, whether it be cancer, or whether it be a verbal attack, or whether it be a financial downfall, or whatever it is, you need not worry that this is just something that's outside God's control. You can think with a spirit of power now. The power of God is in control of this. And also, you need not worry that this is God being against you. Everything, because of what Christ did for us and taking the full wrath of God on the cross, everything that comes into your life now is sovereignly under the power of God, and it is an act of one thing: mercy. It is an act of mercy. You and I might not see how it's mercy, but it's still mercy. And when we think that way, then that enables us to act and to think and to make decisions in a new way. We have a spirit of self control. We are not left to be dominated by fearful thoughts. We're now able and commanded to act in a way that demonstrates faith in the face of fear that we may and will feel. Um, what God's really saying here is He's telling us to go to the seat, or the source of where both our actions and our emotions actually really come from, and that is our mind. He says in 2 Corinthians 10:5, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. When when you and I are fearful as children of God, that is an assault really on the knowledge of who God is, both in the universe and in your life particularly. It is an assault on what you know of God's omnipotence and His omniscience and His omnipresence. Think about it. If you and I walked around all the time, when we watched the nightly news, if the first thought that hit our mind was, man, God's everywhere, not a single person is in that mob doing anything that God's not right there, keeping them from doing anything He's not decided to allow them to do, but actively allowing them to do everything He's decided them to do. But it's for a purpose, because He's omniscient and He knows all things, and He's omnipotent. They can't overpower His will. And He loves me, and He's allowing everything that's happening for out of a merciful motivation toward me and toward all His children. If we thought that way, we would not feel as fearful sometimes. We might still feel that twinge of fear, but it wouldn't affect us the way it does. So how do we get to where those are the thoughts we think? How do we fight that assault against the knowledge of God? Well, He said in the verse again, He says, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. You and I are human beings. We're not given over to mere instincts. God has given you a mind, and He wants you to use it, and He wants you to realize that you have been given the mind of Christ. So you and I now, as children of God, are called to think through the lens of the reality that we did not know at one point in time, but after Christ has come into our life, now that is the context that you and I live in, and we see everything in the world through that reality, the knowledge of Christ, and we make all of our thoughts obey Christ. You and I feel fear, we catch that thought, we say, no, I'm not going to think that way. And the doctor comes in and says, you got cancer, you only got a few months to live. We are not to be overwhelmed by fear so that we totally shut down and we throw the rest of our life away or whatever. We're to say, God's in control. If this is how I die, then I'm going to die to the glory of His name, and I'm going to worship Him forever in heaven. And if He chooses to heal me, it's going to be for the glory of His name here, and I'm going to worship Him here. You know, if we see mobs on the TV, if we see the numbers of the coronavirus going up, then we think thoughts that we are actively submitting to the obedience of who our Lord is. My Lord is in control. He is Christ, and He stands over all this earth, and He claims all of it as His, and He controls all of it totally, and He is not relinquishing any amount of authority or sovereignty to one single molecule, one single politician, one single mob, or one single virus. And he is the reason that you and I can now think in such a way that keeps us from being motivated by fear. And that's what God's really getting at when he says fear not. He's calling for you and I to take an active role in submitting to his will and to the glory of who he really is in our mind first. And then out of our mind, when we think that way, then we have a whole new set of actions, and eventually we'll have a whole new set of emotions. Now, just real quickly, how do we actually do that? How do we take those thoughts captive? Well, he tells us in Deuteronomy 7 again. He says, "You shall not be afraid of them, but you shall remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs, the wonders, the mighty hand, the outstretched arm by which the Lord your God brought you out." What I'm going to encourage you to do is whenever you feel fearful, first of all, go back to what you know about God in the Bible. Look back at what he did to deliver the children of Israel. Look back at what he did to deliver people like David, who stood before Goliath, Daniel, who was in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were going to the fiery furnace. Look back at what he did to deliver Elijah when he was stood before the 450 prophets of Baal. Remember, this is the exact same God. Look at the deliverances of God all through the Bible, and then I want you to get more specific, and I'm going to encourage you to look at what God's done to deliver you specifically. The sin he delivered you from, all the times that people have attacked you, and he delivered you from those attacks, all the times that you've been faced with need and want and lack, and he's provided for you, all the times that you've been sick and he's healed you. I want you to look at these things and remember the goodness of God. Remember how God has never failed ultimately, and that everything that he's brought you through, it's turned out to be for your ultimate good. And meditate on these things, meditate on these truths, so that when you are afraid, you will not be afraid of the things that come against you. When you feel that twinge of fear and those fearful thoughts start to come in, glorify your God by refusing to give into that. But you take those thoughts captive, you turn those thoughts over to Christ, you submit those thoughts in obedience to Christ, and you think the thoughts that God's commanding us think. Think thoughts of his goodness, his glory, his power in the face of the thoughts that Satan would put before you and that the world would present to you. And when we do that, then we glorify God, we honor God, and we're proving not to be a fearful people or a people given to fear. We are a faithful people in the face of fear. So I just hope this encourages you. I love you. I pray that God blesses you. And until next time, be blessed.